The Pacific War had finally ended, but on this particular island, shrouded in mist and clinging mud, fear hadn't received the message. 19 Japanese women stepped down from a transport truck into the American prisoner of war camp, their eyes scanning the compound with a mixture of terror and desperation. Iko Tanaka held a dented music box pressed against her chest, her fingers locked so tight her knuckles had gone white. Everything she'd been told about American soldiers screamed danger. The propaganda posters had shown her exactly what to expect. Monsters, beasts, men without mercy or restraint. But then something unexpected happened. A sign appeared, written in Japanese characters clear enough that even in the fading light, the women could read it. No soldier may touch prisoners. Report violations immediately. When a curious GI wandered toward the fence, an MP turned him away without hesitation. Orders are orders, the soldier's bearing seemed to say. The medical examinations came next, and they were conducted only by female nurses. Soap was distributed freely, placed in each woman's hands as if soap were something precious rather than ordinary. When names were recorded instead of numbers, the women exchanged glances. These men didn't behave like the brutal captors they'd been warned about. These soldiers kept their hands to themselves, maintained their distance, and something about that restraint shifted everything the women thought they knew. The floodlights cut through the Pacific dusk like searchlights hunting for enemy planes, casting harsh white circles across the muddy compound. Iko pressed her spine hard against the wooden slats of the transport truck, her fingers wrapped around the dented music box that had somehow survived the terrible months behind them. 19 other women huddled in the darkness beside her, their faces pale as rice paper in the artificial glare. The truck lurched to a stop with a grinding of brakes that made several women flinch. Everyone out. The American soldier's voice was firm, but without cruelty. Iko's legs trembled as she descended into the mud, her thin canvas shoes soaking through immediately. The barbed wire stretched in neat rows beneath the lights, and beyond it stood low wooden buildings that could only be barracks. Everything smelled of diesel fuel and wet earth and something else. Something clean and sharp she couldn't identify. Inside the medical tent, Sergeant Thomas Reed wiped his hands on a towel and surveyed the space he'd just finished preparing. At 34, he'd seen enough wounded men to understand that healing began with simple things. Clean instruments, steady hands, clear rules. He picked up chalk and wrote in block letters on a small blackboard. No touching, nurse present. The carbolic smell of disinfectant filled the canvas space, mixing with distant sounds of American soldiers calling out baseball scores from somewhere beyond the wire. Reed stepped outside and watched the women being led toward the processing area, their eyes darting everywhere like birds expecting a trap. He'd read their files. Comfort women, that's what the clinical term called them, though those two words couldn't capture what that really meant. These women had been fed stories about American soldiers, he was certain of that. Red tucked the towel into his belt and made himself a silent promise. His hands would stay visible at all times. Kenji Sato adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses and opened the folder containing the camp regulations. At 26, he'd spent the war translating between two worlds that often seemed to speak different languages even when using the same words. His parents were in an internment camp in California, and some nights he wondered if the irony of his position would ever stop cutting so deep. But today, looking at these frightened women, he understood that his job was straightforward. Make the rules clear. You are prisoners of war, he began in careful Japanese, his voice carrying across the small group. You will be treated according to the Geneva Convention rules. No American soldier is permitted to touch you. If anyone violates this rule, you must report it immediately. The women glanced at each other with confusion mixed with disbelief. Everything they had been told about Americans was being contradicted by his first sentences. Iko stepped closer, a young woman with intelligent eyes and careful hands, still clutching the dented music box against her chest. What did they tell you would happen here? Kenji asked gently. They said you would hurt us, Iko replied, her voice smaller than she intended. They said American soldiers were beasts who would... She stopped, unable to finish. Kenji nodded slowly. I understand what you were told. What I'm telling you now is different. The truth is different. Lieutenant Ruth Hale appeared at the processing station carrying an armload of supplies and bearing the no-nonsense confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At 28, she'd learned that dignity was often the first casualty in places like this, and she'd made it her personal mission to ensure it didn't happen on her watch. She began distributing soap, plain cotton dresses, and thin towels to each woman. Medical inspections will be conducted by female personnel only, she announced, then glanced at Kenji. Please translate that. When she noticed a curious American GI approaching the wire fence, she gave him a look that could freeze engine oil. Private, you have duties elsewhere. The soldier retreated immediately. The Japanese women watched this exchange with something approaching wonder. An American woman had just protected them from an American man. Iko accepted the soap and dress from the stern-faced nurse, then looked back at Kenji. Now what am I? She whispered. If not what they used me for. Kenji typed her name carefully on a small card. Iko Tanaka. Now, he said, you are exactly what this says. A person with a name. The mess hall smelled of bacon grease and something sweet that Iko couldn't identify. She sat at the long wooden table with her tin plate, staring at thick slices of canned peaches floating in syrup like golden half-moons. The American food looked so rich, so abundant, that her stomach clenched with an old weariness. Beside her, Sumeko Mori poked at a strip of bacon with her fork. American fruit is loud, Sumeko whispered, watching the syrup drip. When a drop splashed onto the table, she let out a quiet laugh that surprised them both. The sound was so unexpected, so normal, that several other women turned to look. For a moment, the mess hall felt less like a prison and more like a strange sort of breakfast gathering. Iko lifted a piece of peach to her mouth, then stopped. Her throat had closed up. The sweetness was too much, too sudden after months of thin gruel and fear. She set down the fork and pressed her hands flat against the table until the moment passed. Kenji moved through the registration line with methodical patience, his typewriter keys clicking steadily. Each woman stepped forward when her turn came, and each time he asked the same question. What is your full name? When they answered, he typed the characters carefully on a small white card, then slid it across the desk. Michiko Hayashi, said a woman with graying hair and steady eyes. Kenji typed her name and handed her the card. You are more than a number here, Hayashi-san, he said, opening a Red Cross form and positioning it under his pen. Would you like to send a letter home? Michiko stared at the blank form as if it might disappear. They will let us write letters. The Red Cross will deliver them, Kenji confirmed. It may take time, but they will try to find your family. She nodded slowly and took the form with trembling fingers. Reed set up his medical station with the same careful attention he'd given to field hospitals in 3 different Pacific theaters. Clean white sheets stretched over the examination table, instruments arranged by size, and the small chalkboard positioned where everyone could see his rules. When the first woman entered the tent, he kept his hands visible on the table and spoke to Kenji rather than directly to her. Please tell her I need to check for injuries and illness, Ried said. Lieutenant Hale will conduct the examination. I will only observe and provide medical advice. Kenji translated, and the woman, barely 18 with scared rabbit eyes, looked between Red and the female nurse with confusion. She wants to know why you won't examine her yourself, Kenji said. Reed met her gaze briefly, then looked away. Because that's not how we do things here. Tell her that in this camp, her body belongs to her, no one else. When Kenji translated this, the young woman's eyes filled with tears. The afternoon work details were announced with the same careful structure that governed everything in the camp. Laundry duty, kitchen help, sewing repairs for uniforms and linens. Each job came with posted wages, credits that could be used at the small canteen for soap, tea, writing paper, or hard candy. Iko found herself assigned to the sewing station where American uniforms arrived with torn seams and missing buttons. The work was familiar, and her hands moved steadily with needle and thread while her mind tried to process the strangeness of being paid for labor. Sumiko worked beside her, humming softly under her breath. In the late afternoon, the women were led to a wooden building that had been converted into a classroom. Chalkboards lined the walls, and simple English phrases were written in neat script. "Good morning, thank you. Please help me." Lieutenant Hale stood at the front with a patient expression, gauze and a pointer. "Today we learn baseball," she announced through Kenji's translation. The lesson that followed was unlike anything Iko had expected. Lieutenant Hale drew a diamond on the chalkboard and explained the rules with the seriousness of a military briefing. When she said, "Steal second base," Iko raised her hand with concern. "Is stealing not against the law here?" she asked. Kenji grinned, the first real smile Iko had seen from him. "Not that kind of stealing," he said. "It means running very fast to the next base while the other team isn't paying attention." The absurdity of it struck her suddenly. Sitting in an American prison camp, learning about a game where stealing was encouraged and running in circles was the point. Despite everything, she found herself almost smiling back. Iko sat at the small wooden table in the letter-writing area, her pen hovering over the Red Cross stationery like a bird afraid to land. The words she wanted to write seemed too large, too impossible to fit on such a small piece of paper. Around her, other women bent over their own letters with varying degrees of concentration and tears. She began with the simplest truth. "I am alive." The characters looked strange under her pen after so many months of silence. "The Americans did not touch us. We have soap." She paused, thinking of how her mother would read these words, how they might sound like lies given everything the newspapers had said about enemy soldiers. But they weren't lies. They were the most important truth she had ever written. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Iko signed her full name at the bottom of the letter. The ink dried slowly in the humid Pacific air. Kenji was reviewing supply requisitions when Private Brooks approached his desk with the nervous energy of someone carrying bad news. The young soldier kept glancing toward the fence line where the Japanese women were hanging laundry to dry. "Sergeant Reed wants to see you," Brooks said. "There's been some talk. You know, rumors going around outside the wire." Kenji set down his pen carefully. What kind of rumors? Someone dropped leaflets near the perimeter. Japanese writing said American soldiers were using the women at night, that the whole hands-off thing was just for show during the day. The familiar weight of propaganda settled on Kenji's shoulders. He'd spent the war fighting rumors that moved faster than artillery shells and did just as much damage. Who's spreading this? Word is it's coming from the male POW compound. That Lieutenant Nakamura kept hammering on about shame and honor. Kenji recognized the type immediately. These were men who found comfortable falsehoods far easier than hard truths, men who'd rather cling to their own distorted picture of the world than admit they'd misjudged their enemies entirely. What did Captain Briggs plan to do? Nothing formal just yet. Still, worry etched itself across his features. He feared one violation could shatter the entire repatriation effort. The evening wrapped around them with the aroma of simmering rice and the muffled sound of American soldiers betting and bantering somewhere in their quarters. Iko and Sumiko moved along the perimeter path, careful to stay within the boundaries marked by white stones. Walking freely, even within restrictions, still felt like a precious thing. As they neared the eastern fence, they spotted him, a young American soldier standing outside the wire, extending a Hershey bar through the chain links toward them. His expression held genuine warmth, almost desperate to connect. "Hey, miss," he called quietly. Iko halted. The chocolate appeared impossibly luxurious, its brown paper wrapper covered in letters she couldn't decipher. For just a moment, the simple humanity of the gesture pulled at her. Then came the sound of boots grinding against gravel. "Private Brooks," the MP's sharp voice cut the evening like a blade. "Step away from the fence. Now." The young soldier's face flushed crimson. "I was just trying to be nice, Sergeant, just wanted to share some." The officer responded without hesitation. "Orders are orders, son. No gifts, no trades, no contact through the fence. You understand that?" Reed emerged from the medical tent, drawn by the disturbance. He moved to where Brooks stood, shoulders hunched, and spoke in low tones. "Eddie, I know your heart's in the right place, but that line isn't decoration, it's our commitment to these women. Cross it, whatever your intentions might be, and you break that covenant." Iko watched from 30 feet away, her pulse hammering. These American soldiers enforced their own regulations without performance or pretense. Brooks wasn't playing a role for her benefit. He genuinely turned away his own people to preserve her dignity. Later that night, rain hammered steadily on the barracks roof, and Eco lay on her cot, surrounded by the gentle sounds of sleeping women. She pulled the dented music box from beneath her pillow and wound it with care in the darkness. The tune emerged fragile and unsteady, yet uncorrupted. Slowly, other voices joined in. Mako's hum, then Michiko's, then more. For those precious minutes, the barracks held something that echoed home, not the home they'd lost, but perhaps the one they might yet discover. Outside, the rain kept falling, scrubbing dust from the compound and leaving everything fresh and new. Captain Briggs examined the crumpled leaflets scattered across his desk. Japanese characters appeared like furious scratches beneath the lamplight. Kenji had rendered the propaganda into English with detached exactness, though the meaning spoke for itself. American troops assaulted women after dark. The hands-off approach was mere theater for inspectors. Honor demanded true Japanese reject cooperation with their captors' fabrications. How many reached the perimeter? Briggs asked, pressing his fingertips against his temples where pressure was building. Intelligence estimates 50 or 60 distributed around the perimeter and surrounding village. Kenji answered, Lieutenant Nakamura's been prolific. Briggs gazed out toward the male POW compound, where evening fires sent wispy smoke skyward. Command wants to terminate the education programs. Too much mixing between our personnel and the women creates operational liability, they claim. Something icy crystallized in Kenji's chest. Sir, cancelling those programs validates Nakamura's argument. Education demonstrates that the rumors are fabrication. Protocol disproves falsehood. I've conveyed that already, but if this reaches Washington with improper framing, their exchange fractured as shouting erupted from the main gate. Both hurried outside to find a gathering near the fence dividing the male and female compounds. Japanese POW officers gestured with agitation while American MPs worked to contain the escalation. Lieutenant Nakamura's words cut across the noise, his English sharp with condemnation. You dishonor these women by caging them like animals. Better to perish honorably than subsist as American possessions. One of his men hurled a stone toward the women's barracks. It struck the wooden structure with a dull crack, and several women bolted for shelter behind the building. An MP raised his rifle and squeezed off a warning round skyward. The gunshot fractured the moment, freezing everyone in place. Eco huddled behind the barracks with her heart thundering inside her ribs. That ancient terror came flooding back ice-cold and suffocating. The tentative peace she'd constructed, piece by careful piece, shattered instantly. Those were the sounds she knew, furious voices, women fleeing, violence suspended overhead like smoke. Lieutenant Hale appeared, carrying a clipboard, her face carved from stone. She strode methodically through the compound, securing new notices in English and Japanese. Roll call every 2 hours, no gatherings exceeding 5 women, all instructional sessions postponed pending examination. The Japanese lettering stood particularly harsh against white paper. Regulations remain unchanged. American personnel will maintain prescribed distance. Policy violations shall be reported and prosecuted. Reed discovered Eco in the medical tent that same evening, attending to a small laceration on her hand acquired during her scramble for safety. Her fingers trembled as she worked a dampened cloth over the wound. Let me help, Reed began, then paused. He stepped back and summoned Lieutenant Hale. Could you manage the dressing? I'll keep things moving conversationally. Hale dressed the wound with practiced grace, while Reed sustained a flowing conversation about anything except the afternoon's disorder. Back in Ohio, my boy Danny collected cuts like this, shinying up apple trees. His mother would fix him up while I'd share stories about my grandfather's orchard. Corn so sweet it made you dream, and bacon that made you weep with happiness. Against her own resistance, Eco's breathing quieted as Reed's voice continued. Somehow discussing breakfast foods as treasured recollections rendered the world less menacing. Why do you speak about bacon so frequently? She asked through Kenji's interpretation. Reed's expression softened. Because it represents something good waiting for all of us when this concludes. Something ordinary and genuine and worth surviving for. Yet fragility continued its erosion. That evening, Iko's letter came back stamped address unknown, building destroyed. She studied the envelope until the words swam, then reached for her music box. The mechanism had deteriorated, the melody stopping midway through the opening bars. She held the broken mechanism and sensed everything giving way beneath her. Maybe the fabrication transforms into truth, she murmured to Sumiko. If no one voices contradiction, what remains? Kenji presented a typed proposal to Captain Briggs in the command office. 3 days of relentless rain had transformed the compound into a labyrinth of mud, confining everyone to quarters and fraying patience. A public declaration, Briggs read the document aloud. Testimony from the prisoners themselves, delivered during weekly assembly with witnesses, Japanese and English both, with male POW representatives present, recorded officially with distribution to the Red Cross and military press. Briggs reclined in his chair, leather groaning beneath his weight. Nakamura will characterize it as coercion. He'll insist they're forced to fabricate. That's exactly why it must be voluntary, sir. The women decide their participation, they determine their own words. We simply furnish the venue. And if they choose silence, Kenji held his commander's gaze steadily. Silence carries its own eloquence. Yet I believe they're prepared to speak genuinely. They require assurance. Someone will genuinely listen. Assembly morning arrived overcast and damp. Canvas, stretched between structures, provided shelter for witnesses. Iko stood in the barracks, scrutinizing the typewritten page Kenji had provided. Her name appeared in careful English letters at the document's head. Statement of Iko Tanaka, age 19, Hiroshima Prefecture. She reviewed the straightforward words she'd dictated yesterday. Nothing ornate or sophisticated, merely candid truth in comprehensible language. You needn't participate. Sumiko offered quietly beside her. Nobody expects it. Iko folded the paper with deliberation. Silence hasn't safeguarded me previously. It protects nobody now. The assembly expanded gradually as morning advanced. American personnel occupied wooden benches beneath one canvas structure, while male POW representatives claimed another section. Lieutenant Nakamura stood among them, uniform immaculate, expression freezingly doubtful. Reed positioned himself near the medical station, hands clasped at his back. Lieutenant Hale checked attendance with meticulous care. Captain Briggs opened proceedings with military formality. This assembly convenes to document testimony regarding detention conditions for female prisoners. Participation remains voluntary. Bilingual translation will be provided. Kenji approached with the official regulations document and delivered the language in precise tones. No American military personnel shall engage in physical contact with female prisoners of war. Female medical staff exclusively conduct examinations. Violations warrant immediate reporting and court-martial. Rain drummed steadily against canvas as Kenji concluded. Then Iko advanced deliberately toward the assembly's front. Her typed statement gripped firmly in trembling fingers. She'd never addressed such a gathering, had never imagined her voice held consequence beyond her barracks walls. She surveyed the assembled collection, American soldiers maintaining professional bearing, Japanese officers displaying expressions ranging from intrigue to scorn. Her fellow prisoners gathered beneath their collective shelter. My name is Iko Tanaka, she commenced in Japanese, barely audible above rainfall. Reading carefully from the page. We received warnings that Americans would hurt us. They did not. They provided soap and documented our identities. No soldier has made contact without consent. We've received payment for labor. We've learned English vocabulary. We've transmitted letters homeward. She paused, meeting Lieutenant Nakamura's eyes directly. Others insist this is deception. Others claim we're secretly exploited. I testify this is untrue. Kenji rendered each statement into English, his voice carrying distinctly throughout the assembly. Several American personnel nodded minimally. One male POW officer whispered toward Nakamura, who responded with a sharp silencing gesture. The posted regulations in our detention area have been faithfully followed. Iko proceeded. American hands have remained at American sides. Our respect has been maintained. This I declare truthfully. The stenographer's keys clicked methodically, recording everything. A photographer advanced and documented the assembly, scrupulously preserving the mandated distance from the women. When Eco completed her words, stillness extended far enough for everyone to distinguish rain tapping canvas and the distant ocean sound beyond the perimeter.